because they are currently working with DART, and DART is working with DCTA to determine what proper, what like the next level of service delivery could be. So at this point, staff does not have any concerns about extending that contract by 6 months, simply for the purpose of allowing them the time to get a new contract in place.
So do they have any plans beyond June if we do extend?
They are waiting for DART to respond to their request. So as of right now, they do not have any plans beyond June.
Okay.
And I would say that, this is Raymond, that we have been in conversations with DART. We're still trying to figure out if there's a model that works for the agencies to potentially collaborate or for DART to provide the service directly. But no decisions have been made. We're still trying to understand what might be possible. And the extension that's being requested is to give DART enough time to figure out if they would try to go it alone or to potentially collaborate with DCTA.
Super. Thank you. And can I ask something on consent agenda 3?
Yes, go ahead.
When are we going to consider or have a conversation about the North Texas Express service? That we're looking at the outcomes and the numbers there, but it just seems it's the most expensive service we've got. It's got the lowest ridership going. We really need to have a conversation about that one.
So we have actually been having conversations with Trinity Metro about North Texas Express. They expressed interest several months ago about no longer providing the joint service, but them providing kind of the Fort Worth to the North Park and Ride service, and then DCTA providing a service from Denton to the North Park and Ride. We requested some information and gave them a status a couple weeks ago, and we're still waiting to hear back. It was our hope that we would be having some ongoing conversations and be able to report back to the board on those conversations in hopes that we would be able to take a modification to that service to the public in February and then roll any sort of a service change into our May service changes. But unfortunately, we have not heard back, but we are working with them daily on several other things. And so I think it's just one of those things that we need to follow back up with. But we would be happy to bring an update back to the board next month and provide kind of a progress report on efforts if that is helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to see like the total cost of this service. How much are we subsidizing? Sounds like the next round of service changes wouldn't be till February. I was, maybe considering, since it's such an outlier, that we just consider eliminating the service in January, if we can possibly do that. I mean, we're only doing like 12 people a day round trip.
So if we eliminate the service, we are required to participate in the public involvement process. If that's the board's direction, we do have a public meeting that's going to be at the very beginning of February that we could roll that into. So, I mean, we can certainly bring that back next month and provide more detail on the actual spend and ridership and have some discussion around North Texas Express if you would like.
I would like that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, and I did have a question just on page 63 of the backup, when I'm looking at the ridership numbers, just so that I can understand what I'm reading here. So when I look at the actual ridership, of course, that includes the impact from COVID. But the budgeted ridership is what we had anticipated, as if everything would have been status quo. Is that correct? Because that was what we budgeted back when the budget was approved.
We did revise ridership throughout the year during the budget process as we reduced budgeted revenues.
Mm-hmm.
As you can, some routes still probably not as much as we should have, particularly UNT. We didn't reduce that budget as much, assuming that more students would come back than did.
No, that's helpful. Yeah, that's helpful to just understand that. So, and for on the Connect ridership, that's both Louisville and Denton. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then one final question, or just yeah, just to help me have some clarity, on page 65, which is in the sales tax revenue column at the top between actual and budget. And again, Marissa, I guess the budgeted is the same. You said we went along and we changed these sales tax projections for the budget when we hit the pandemic. So do you remember what it was originally before we even started changing that?
Yes. So Brandy sent out an updated sales tax report. It wasn't available when the packet was distributed. We just received our sales tax numbers yesterday from the comptroller's office.
Okay.
So she emailed that out this morning, and it will be uploaded into the packet on the website. But our original budget for sales tax for the fiscal year was just over 29 million.
Okay.
And with our final numbers through the sales tax we will receive tomorrow for sales that took place in the month of September, that fiscal year total is 29.8. So fiscal year to date, we are about 800,000 over our original budget, or $1 million over our prior year sales tax.
That's amazing. Okay, wonderful. I mean, that just reflects with the cities as well, that the cities didn't take as big a hit as they thought that they would. It certainly didn't.
Yes, sir.
Did not. Okay, good. All right.
Yep.
Any other questions on the consent agenda? And if not, the chair would entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
I make a motion to approve consent agenda as read.
All right. Do we have a second?
Second, Cesar.
All right. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
I hear the wind noise. All opposed by like sign. I think it passed unanimously. So yes, the consent agenda passes unanimously. We're going to call in, let's see, I believe, informational reports, yes. There's no action needed on these informational reports, but does the board have any questions, or does staff have any comments or clarifications on the information?
Just as I mentioned, the sales tax report was emailed out to the board this morning. And then the MOS update is included in your packet on page 68. There has not been any update from the prior month, and there were not any budget transfers completed this month.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Yes, TJ.
Mayor, thanks. Can you guys walk me through the discussions with the firms? You know, what zones or what kind of coverage are we looking at? What do we ask them to bid? Which one has the best connectivity? I know we kind of got a little bit of, they both do connectivity to the Go Pass, but have we looked at which one has better connectivity to the Go Pass? Any like just overview on this one?
TJ, which are you talking about? Because there's two, there's the Lakeway zone, and then there's the two we talked about last, I guess it was in June or July, or not the last board meeting, that we were asked to sort of slow down the negotiations, which was with VIA and what's the other?
VIA, the
Care Labs.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my question is to the memo in the packet.
Yeah.
And it says that negotiations are currently being conducted with both firms, and staff anticipates presenting the resulting task orders at the December board meeting for approval. So
Right.
If there's task orders coming to us, what are those zones that are related to those task orders coming next month?
So if I could clarify, we are not, we
So
had
we don't have
slated on we had slated on the board outlook. We've kept the MOS proposals for approval on the board outlook as a rolling item. And so we've been modifying it as each board meeting occurs, as the process moves forward. And so I think that that's probably where procurement took that from, is because it is currently rolling and it is on the December outlook. But as part of the transformation initiative, we're actually going to provide kind of a snapshot of major agency decisions that were really kind of stem off of the transformation initiative. And we can provide some very specific timing for those MOS proposals and show how the board is going to be reviewing them, providing input, and how that relates to bringing a final proposal to the board for approval.
Okay. Maybe this will help me too. If I think it's page 97 from our packet, Nicole.
Yes, sir.
So on page 97, there's some decisions that are kind of outlined there. Can you guys maybe walk me through the timing on how you see this all rolling out?
Yeah, so I think that we actually have a supplemental document that we just developed like in the last 24 hours that will give you a much more detailed, and I don't know, Raymond.
If you have that, because I'm aware of that, I think that would fit really nicely into the transformation initiative agenda item, because that's where we're going to be talking about, sort of next steps and really try to get a plan of action. Is that okay, TJ?
That works for me, as long as you've got a place for it, I'm happy.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Fantastic. Okay. Any other? I thought I saw something for me on here, but let me look. I think I think that's it. Okay. Any other questions on these informational discussions or staff comments? All right. Seeing none, then we will move to our regular agenda, and we're going to call sort of an audible here. I was asked to call an audible, and it's not going to be, well, never mind. All right. We're going to go to agenda item number 6, and then we'll pop up agenda item number 6 to the top, and then we'll bring and go through the agenda as originally published. So agenda item number 6 is discuss and consider DART interlocal agreement, the ILA, for shared services.
Yes, thank you. And I'd ask to have this moved up in the agenda because I think it may inform some of the discussions around priority setting in the transformation initiative, which is the next agenda item. So Brandy, if you will proceed with the next slide. You can find this in your packet on page 124. What I tried to do here is pull out some of the main elements of the shared local agreement with DART. In your packet, you'll note that we've had a shared services agreement with DART since 2010. These are some of what I've tried to outline here are some of the deal points, all the major deal points that result in some financial transaction between the agencies. These are fairly nominal for TVM servicing, platform maintenance. When we get into the access fee, this is probably the access and the impact fee. I want to spend a little bit of time walking you through that. So DART and DCTA have an agreement in place. It was originally intended when we created the agreement that DCTA would compensate DART for our riders onto their system. It's not much different than some of the conversations that we've had about third parties and how they impact our cost of doing business. I think it's acknowledged that when we connected the A train to the DART system, that our passengers do go into DART. Some of those passengers come from DART service into our service area. And so there's this this settlement, if you will, that has always been understood. We brought this item to the board in the past regarding access impact fees, and I'm going to make an attempt to walk us through this. And please, if you have any questions, stop me so we can walk through it, because I want to make sure all the board members are comfortable. Next slide, please. So there's two major themes when we talk about the impact and what DCTA will ultimately pay DART. There's an access fee, concept of an access fee, and a concept of an impact fee. They're separate and distinct. I'll walk you through those. The calculation of the access fee was discussed at length over the years, how best to do this. And what's being proposed is that there's a definition of a net peak ridership difference. And so we would look at all the ridership, DCTA transferring to DART and DART Green Line transferring to DCTA, and we would net those out. But it's not all. It's really focused on the peak AM and peak PM service. So from 5:50 AM to 9:10 AM, you look at the difference between the riders transferring during that peak And if there's a increase in ridership onto the DART service, that they basically have a policy, a board policy that says that there's a $2 charge. There's all kinds of ways. I've looked at some of the analysis they hired consultants to do, and it can get really, really complicated. So to try to simplify it, in DART's policy, they have a $2 per passenger cost that they apply to the net of the ridership. Next slide, please. So as an example of how this fee would net out, the discussion has been that we look at the prior year's ridership to determine what we would pay for the fee the current year, and as each year goes on, that we would true it up at the end of the year, and then we would look at the actual ridership and the fee and then divide by 12, and we would pay a monthly payment. So in this case, as an example, for fiscal year 2019, if you looked at all the ridership, netted it out for those peak hours, those 51,816 passengers that transferred that transferred over to the DART Green Line system. And if you apply the $2 charge, it would be roughly $103,632. So you divide that by 12, it gives you the monthly amount. And that's what we would be invoiced by DART. We would pay within 30 days. So that's the access fee and how that would work. Next slide. Example of the impact fee. Now the impact fee is different. The impact fee has to do with when passengers from DCTA transfer to the Green Line, if there are enough passengers that it requires them to put an additional car onto their train consist, then they're paying for the maintenance of that additional car during the hours that we're transporting folks. And it's a reasonable expectation that they're having to add additional equipment onto their service, that we would reimburse them for that. So the example here is they would generate a report each month. Now here's a nuance. So they would only add an additional car, and this is by their policy, when the total ridership, both seated and standing, exceeds 329 passengers. I don't know the number of seated, but basically it's about, I think it's 1.5 or 1.75 of the seated capacity. Then by their customer service experience, they know that they need to add another car. So what they're doing is they're going to keep track of when those boardings on a particular car exceed 329, then that would require them to add another car to a consist. And by adding the car to the consist, they would invoice us $237 per trip, if you will, both coming and going. So as an example here, for December, there were, 329 passengers. DART would provide a 2-car consist. The month of December had 20 weekdays. DCTA would be invoiced for the $237 times the 20 trips. And then they multiply times 2, because ultimately those passengers not only go in the morning, they come back in the afternoon. So our monthly fee would be $9,480. Next slide.
Raymond, real quick on that, if I just had a real quick question.
Sure.
And I'm trying to think if it would apply to the impact fee. So let's say on this slide, obviously that's a train station that, people can connect from Denton, DCTA line to the Green Line, and then people can go there stand alone and get on the Green Line heading into Dallas. So there's a way that I guess it's people who've bought fares that how are we making sure that we're not counting people who have not been on the DCTA train that are just driving there and getting
it? Yeah. So they use passenger counters. They also periodically check boardings and alightings to determine how many passengers actually got on from the Green Line, or from who actually showed up on the station platform versus came off of the DCTA service onto the DART service. And we did have quite a few conversations about that. Historically, what that's been is a survey that gets trued up. but it's a bit challenging to try to figure out like every day who got on, who got off, and somebody standing there to determine whether they got on for the vehicle. Now, the COG has in the past hired a company to come in and actually survey that so that it was statistically valid. It's something that we're going to have to work with DART on as we move forward. But it is a challenge because there's no automatic counter that's tracking a human being getting off of one service to the other. But it is certainly a valid question that needs to be addressed.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I agree with you. It does. Yep. Okay.
And
Thank
we
you.
can come back. I mean, later, what I was trying to do is get us through this. We can certainly come back and deep dive into some of the
Sure.
these statistics.
Okay. Yep. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Next slide, please. Let's see. So impact fee, we recognize that the ridership has an effect, that the $237 would be multiplied times the number of weekdays. We kind of walked through that already. Let's go to the next slide. So they'll provide a report monthly. We'll look at the loads of the 329, which is a pretty high bar. We did spend some time talking to Todd Plesko, their vice president of planning. It doesn't happen very often. So this is when we have significant high ridership. I certainly don't believe we're going to get there in 2020, likely not get there in 2021. So I don't expect that we'll be paying this impact fee, at least for the next year or two. And I think DART also agrees with that. So we've already paid through 2020 with the agreement that we had before when we cut them a check for close to $1 million. So this would really potentially impact us in 2022 and beyond. And I'll cover that in a few minutes. So that's the way the access and impact fee work. Much like we have an inflation, 3.5% is typically what they're building into their cost of living adjustment for their staff, their operators, their employees. So there's a contemplation that this would be a 3.5% increase in that fee annually.
Okay.
So that's what's being contemplated. Next slide. And then also in the shared services agreement. So all of this is part of the ILA that DART has with DCTA. We have a crew room that we share, so we pay for that as well. It's $5,400 annually. Next. We have insurance coverage. So DCTA and DART share the responsibility for insurance. As we've talked about in the previous meetings about excess rail liability insurance. We also have workers' compensation insurance, commercial liability insurance that we're required to have. Of course we do. Next slide. The rail liability insurance. So we are, I spoke to Gary Thomas, the president and CEO of DART and his team. They took the conversation about DCTA being included in the DART policy to their committee yesterday, Tuesday, and it passed. So I don't expect or anticipate any issues with us being able to join DART's policy, which is great news. I believe they take it for final board approval in December, so we should have all of that put to bed by then, but that's included in the agreement. Next, please. And we're requesting that the board authorize me to finalize and execute the shared services interlocal agreement with DART. Now, this is a living, breathing document. So while we have this access impact fee, hopefully, if the board agrees that we're going to pay this amount, which I'm recommending that we do, we have already had conversations with DART that have been ongoing with staff to staff about the possibility of DART utilizing our rail O&M facility initially to commission or test and commission their FLIRT vehicles for the Silver Line. Our last meeting was yesterday, We had a very engaging meeting. I think a lot of potential benefits going to come from that discussion, but they're not contemplating just doing testing and commissioning. We actually had a conversation about the potential of a joint operating facility located at our rail O&M. There's a lot of discussion and interest in not only testing, commissioning, and operating, but upgrading the rail line between the Silver Line and DCTA. Currently, I think it's at like a class 2 track, but they're very interested in working with DCTA over the next couple of months to hopefully create an LOI, much like we're doing with Trinity Metro, to discuss the details of what a potential long-term relationship would look like. We had a very healthy discussion about a platform, how they would locate a platform if we're interested in getting down to Carrollton to connect to the Silver Line. But the reality is if the conversations continue and there's interest by this board to do so, I think there's just an exceptional opportunity and window to actually have a connection with the Silver Line. Initially, for operating purposes, but I think future discussions are certainly open. I think DART and DART's board are very supportive. At least that's what I'm hearing from Gary and Tim and their team, of thinking about transit in a little bit different way than what we have in the past. But I do believe that this would create a tremendous opportunity for the two agencies, not only to jointly operate, but to really become a lot more effective and efficient from a cost perspective and from a service delivery perspective, and streamlining both organizations' operation and administration. I just think there's a lot of opportunity there. So while this ILA is, while we're asking for approval for this impact fee, one of the discussions that we had is if we do continue to pursue this jointly with DART's board and their staff, that we would probably revisit this whole access impact fee, because there would be significant benefits to DART. I think there could be significant benefits to DCTA. And so all of these things, I believe, are up for negotiations in the future. They need to move pretty quickly. And I believe they're receiving vehicles, at least the current plan is they would start receiving vehicles in about 18 months. So there's a lot of interest on their part to potentially locate a temporary facility in fairly short order. So before we do any of that, we need to kind of lay out the deal points, and that's what we talked about yesterday, was to lay out the deal points in a LOI, get in front of both boards, have the staff start to workshop what some of these costs might look like and the cost profiles. I do believe that the conversations that we've never had like this before. And I think a lot of it is because there's a lot of interest in DARTs.
Okay. Raymond, if we could, because I know that the agenda item right now is the ILA, and that is part of the discussion, but in the sense of this is what's coming. So if we could maybe have a little less detail so that we don't maybe stray outside.
Sure.
Is staff asking, because I'm trying to, when I'm looking at the caption and I'm looking at this slide, is this an action item for approval today? Okay. All right. And so then go ahead. No, go ahead.
The reason I brought that up was I just wanted to set the tone that this ILA request is to approve the access and impact fee,
right.
But we will have further discussions about amendments to the ILA if the board decides that we want to pursue this in the future, that we would be bringing up additional modifications in the future to the ILA.
Okay. All right. Okay. Any more discussion, Raymond, on the ILA?
No, sir.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Discussion. I can't see. Okay. I guess then, and I don't mind taking action on this for myself. I guess I am going to really want to get some information on how we're determined. Oh, yes. Go ahead.
Sorry. Cesar has his hand raised.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Cesar.
So I just want to clarify the action, the way it's written, it says it's seeking the board's authorization, approval to authorize the CEO to finalize the ILA.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not really approving the ILA in so much as we're asking the CEO to finalize I guess the additional points. Help me understand what
Yeah,
other.
that probably wasn't clear enough, Cesar, because it is requesting that we take the redlined version of it, complete the document, and then get it back to DART and allow me to sign the agreement as is with the request. So it's finalize and approve. It should say finalize and approve. My apologies for that.
Okay, so what's you're showing us, the red light version is what you're asking us to approve.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. Okay, any other questions? I would at some point just like to have an offline with how are we proving up the ridership? I mean, and
Yes.
this is, I mean, and it makes sense because I think we've faced those challenges just in our own bus systems as far as getting good data. So we're taking surveys on it, but we really don't know how many people are really getting off DCTA and jumping on the DART train and how many are just there. And so at some point. All right, any other questions for staff on this? So my understanding based on the discussion is that what the action that's being taken is seeking approval for board approval for the red line version as the final draft and authorizing Raymond to execute it together with DART officials. Is that my understanding?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Chair would entertain any action on the item.
I make a motion to approve agenda item number 6.
Second.
I'll second.
All right, I think we had TJ second that one. Okay, we've got a motion and a second for approval of agenda item number 6 for the DART interlocal agreement for shared services. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, I believe, unanimously. Thank you. Then now we'll go back up to the top of the agenda for agenda item number 1. Discuss transformation initiative progress report, and that begins on page 70 of your packet.
Yes, thank you. So we have several things to cover in this item, and if the board is okay, I'd kind of like to go through the progress report. I'd like to have Chris Newport give an update on the final report that the board will receive, and then we can bring up the priority actions and deadlines that we talked about earlier in the meeting.
Okay.
So the progress report can be found in your packet on page 70, and I do want to call out in the next steps section where it lists like the Accenture one-on-one meetings with the board, the final output from the workshop, and then the discussion of service standards. That those, we didn't have any dates for those when we sent this packet out last week. And so an updated timeline was sent out to the board on Friday in your Friday board email. And so I did want to call out a couple of dates on that email. So obviously this week, Chris Newport with Accenture has been conducting one-on-one meetings with the voting board members. The week of 11/12, the agenda and memo was for this week, the agenda for today was updated so that we could have more discussion about the transformation initiative, which was a request that came out of the workshop last week. And then also today, Accenture will be giving the board kind of an update on what will be included in that final report. Then the week of Thanksgiving, we will be sending several documents to the board all at one time. And so that's going to be the final report from Accenture, which will capture everything that was included in the workshop, as well as the prioritization and some recommendations on service standards. We'll send an updated organizational chart with contract responsibilities, the 2019 compensation study that was conducted by Siegel Waters, and then the Louisville density map. So the board will have all of those attachments that they can review in preparation for the board meeting that's on December 10th. And at that meeting, Accenture will actually present the final recap report and be able to answer any questions that the board has. but we will also be asking the board to take action on 2 items. We'll be asking the board to take action on the list of priorities that were workshopped and then will be captured in the final report. And so obviously if the board has any modifications to that, that can be done in that meeting, and then we can take action on that updated priority list. We will also be asking for action on the service standards. And Accenture plans to make a recommendation on a benchmark of service standards. We can have a discussion at the December board meeting if the board would like to modify those at all, and then we'll take action on any of those modifications as well. And that's really going to set us up for this priority timeline that we're going to share with you shortly. Kind of everything is based on a decision ahead of it, and so that it's much like a domino effect. And so we really need to get those priorities and those service standards approved by the board for everything else to fall into place. So with that, that is just an update on the timing. So we're almost there. So on the December 10th meeting is when the task order number 1 with Accenture will close. With that, if there are no questions on the timeline, I'd like to turn it over to Chris Newport, who's on the call, and he can kind of share with you an update as to what you might see in that final report.
Okay, not hearing any questions. Thank you, Nicole. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you again. This will be a shorter talk point for me than last Thursday. So what you can expect to see in our final report will be, and I think Nicole did a good job of summing it up. So we will have a summary of the outputs and the discussion that we had in our meeting last Thursday, the items that were prioritized by the board, as well as output that you saw from our visioning workshop for the mentee exercises. I think more importantly, what you'll see is the final set of recommended transformation initiative items that will incorporate the board's feedback, and good news being, as I've discussed with a few of you this week, is that there was a great degree of alignment between what we viewed as the initiatives that ought to be prioritized and what the board felt as well. So you will see that in a roadmap view. So if you envision a slide, there will be a column that will include the names of the initiatives, and then you would see a timeline view so that you could see our recommendations on which initiatives should be begun over the next 12 to 18 months by DCTA, and in what sequence, and how that could play out. So you can call that a roadmap, you could call that a potential game plan, but that will be provided. And then for each initiative, you will see what we call a charter, which would be a high level description for each initiative, the actions that would comprise each initiative, key considerations that would be associated with each one of those initiatives. So high-level benefits case, high-level cost estimate, implementation timeline or duration, along with the potential risks to successful implementation, and some initial mitigation strategies to address those risks. And then you can expect that there will be, we will need to provide a little bit of backup probably for each initiative. So behind each charter for a specific initiative, to the extent we need to provide additional information, that will follow. But generally speaking, that will be the final report. And inside of that will be, as Nicole alluded to, there will be some more information to build out the discussion that we had with you all last Thursday regarding different types of service standards that DCTA might consider implementing, and as well as some additional scenario analysis around those different service standard parameters. So, Nicole, I think that would wrap it up for me, unless there are questions, of course.
Any questions so far?
Just maybe a quick comment, Mayor Watts. First of all,
Yes.
Chris, that sounds very exciting to me. So thank you for that. I'd ask that staff, I'm going to go back to that page 97, which talks about service changes and whatnot in our packet. I'm going to assume, since that's more day-to-day operations or, contracts with UNT and those types of things. But if we can maybe, as you guys are looking at that, see if there's any impacts on time availability, staff needs, where the Accenture timelines might bog down or get tied up with some of that, day-to-day that we have to deal with as well. That would help me understand what's coming on the parallel tracks, right? The important versus the urgent versus what we would just normally have to do.
Absolutely. And once we have that final report, if there are going to be what we would see as a hurdle in implementing something, we would certainly bring that to the forefront.
Okay. Any other questions for Chris at this time? All right, seeing none. Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
And if there are no other questions, and Brandy, can you pull up the slide that we sent you this morning? I know there's 2 pages. If you could go, yes, perfect. I know that is relatively small. So I know Brandy said that she could send a PDF out to the board today so that you could take a deeper look at it. But this is something that we wanted to share with you. There are actually 4 swim lanes. That's what we're calling them. On this page particularly, I'm going to walk you through 3 of those swim lanes because all of those 3 swim lanes are occurring in parallel with one another. And as I mentioned before, much like the domino effect, they are interdependent on one another, the progress. And so if there is one delay, it could kind of create a delay, in other areas across those 3 swim lanes. So I did want to, before we go into this, I did want to tell you that these dates are based on ideal timing. Like I said, I mean, this assumes that we get board approval when projected. It assumes that, we don't run into any other obstacles on the way there. But I will also say that it's an aggressive timeline, but we feel confident that we can push through and we can make that timeline as long as, like I said before, we don't run into any hurdles. So the 3 kind of swim lanes that are working in parallel right now are the overall service plan, which really is the results of the transformation initiative coupled with the MOS procurements that we've been talking about. The second is the Trinity Metro potential partnership for bus operations and maintenance. And then the third is the NTMC CBA negotiations. So if we'll take kind of the green swim lane first, which is the service plan, we've kind of outlined that at the next board meeting is when we'll have the transformation initiative final report, and that's when we would like the board to approve those priorities as well as those service standards. If we get that approval, then in the December-January timeframe, we will work with the 2 MOS providers as part of that MOS procurement. We will share with them the service standards. We will share with them the data that is in Accenture's final report, and they will be able to develop some service proposals that then you can see in the January-February timeframe. We would have a joint meeting with both the NTMC and the DCTA boards to present those proposals and get board feedback on those proposals. Once we have that feedback and we have a good idea of what the board is going to be supportive of in regard to those service proposals, we'd be able to enter into the public involvement process, which will be required as part of the Title VI program. Once we go through that, then what we would deliver to the board in another specially called meeting with both the DCTA and the NTMC boards is that we would provide that finalized service plan that was taken to the public, all of the public feedback, and the Title VI analysis. Once the board has all 3 of those and they approve that, then we can move forward with a service launch. But between that approval and the service launch, we need a minimum of 45 days in order to conduct the service bid and provide the required notification communication to the ATU. So that's kind of a start to finish from the service plan perspective. If everything goes according to plan, in May, and I would suggest aligning it with the May service changes so that you have 1 round of communications going. So it would include whatever the modifications are to our fixed route, whatever the new on-demand services are, whatever the summer UNT service is going to look like, all of that would happen all at one time. And TJ, to your question, that would keep us in line with kind of that decision cycle that's on page 97. So everything that you're seeing here would be fully in line with that. At the same time, running in parallel, we're having discussions with Trinity Metro about the operations of bus operations and maintenance. So you'll see here that today we're bringing the letter of intent to the board, and we are going to be asking for approval to have the CEO sign that letter of intent. The Trinity Metro board is going to be reviewing and considering having their CEO sign the exact same letter, and their board meeting is on the 16th of this month. If we sign that today, and get approval to sign that today, then staff will start exploring what those options are. So does it look like contracting with Trinity Metro? Is it an ILA? Is it using NTMC potentially as a solution? And so we'll really just start that investigation process. At that same specially called joint board meeting between DCTA and NTMC in the January timeframe is when we will kind of provide an in-depth partnership exploration update. And so you'll see those bracketed lines between the presentation of MOS vendor proposals and then the partner exploration update. We really need to know how the board feels about those MOS proposals in order to inform the exploration that we have with Trinity Metro, which will then inform any sort of NTMC negotiations on the CBA. So all of those things really play together and need to align. So after we provide the board with a partnership exploration update, and we do believe it's important to keep both the DCTA and the NTMC board in the loop, then we would work to kind of finalize partner structures in the February-March timeframe, and then have another specially called meeting in the March-April timeframe where we would be asking for the DCTA to approve that contracting recommendation. Then that would give us until May to launch that partnership, and we would launch that partnership in conjunction with the May service changes. Again, having those two things align. And then lastly, we would be working on the NTMC CBA negotiations. I will say that, you know, the role that DCTA plays in the NTMC CBA negotiations is strictly from a budgetary perspective since we fund NTMC. So next month, NTMC's labor attorney is scheduled to provide the NTMC board with an overview of the CBA negotiation process. In the December-January timeframe is when NTMC is finalizing their CBA edits and they're beginning that negotiation process with the ATU. Then during the specially called board meeting that's in January, February, we would then provide, NTMC would provide an update on how the negotiations are going, any roadblocks, and just a general progress report. Negotiations will continue. And then in the March-April timeframe, when we have that second specially called meeting, we would hope that the NTMC board would approve the CBA, but I think it's also important to note that this is probably the one item that, you know, timing is really key on any of these things. And so depending on what happens with the partnership with Trinity Metro, depending on how the ATU responds to the negotiation process, that could potentially push the new CBA days, weeks, months. It's really just all dependent. But ideally, like I said, in an ideal world, the NTMC board would approve that in March, and then in April, like April 1, the new CBA would be in place. So as you can see, we're kind of working these three swim lanes in parallel, understanding that they do depend on one another. We have committed to providing an update, provide each board, both DCTA and NTMC, an update and all three of these swim lanes at every board meeting now moving forward. So you'll see a standing item on the agenda. And just know that proposed timing, like I said, is dependent on individual initiative progress. But certainly by providing a monthly update, we would be able to tell you if something seems like maybe we are running into a roadblock or if we're ahead of schedule. And so this would be a living, breathing document that we would be able to tweak and keep the board up to date with. There is a fourth swim lane that I know Raymond is going to go over, but I didn't know if you had any questions on this portion before we progress to the next page.
Yeah, I do. So yeah, let's open it up here real quick for me. First of all, I really appreciate this. It at least gives us an idea of and whether or not, we tweak it or not, we now have some plan that we can take a look at. So help me understand, because when I look at the bottom one, which is the CBA negotiations, because I know the CBA negotiations, if I remember correctly from when there was that kind of roadblock last time, because we have to specify what routes are fixed. I mean, we have to give specific routing numbers. How many fixed routes do we have, and things such as that. Is that correct?
So in the current CBA, it does specify the minimum number of fixed routes that we are required to order, that we are required to provide. So as part of that negotiation, that might be something that NTMC considers for negotiation. But that is why it's important for us to know how the board feels about the MOS proposals and if that's going to impact the total number of fixed routes, so that DCTA can notify NTMC so that they can be having proper discussions with the ATU.
Sure. So then what I'm hearing you say is, and when I'm looking at this, because you're right, the service plan, those MOS proposals for either one provider for Louisville, I mean, any on-demand, however we structure that, together with the Trinity Metro partnership, are absolutely critical decision points that need to be made prior to really any kind of real deep dive and substantive discussion in the CBA, because that's going to determine, am I hearing that correctly?
Absolutely. And so what NTMC staff and NTMC officers would do up until that point is that throughout the years, we keep notes on, is there verbiage that could be clarified or that the intent could be made more clear? And so we would be focusing on identifying internally what those potential modifications would be. We would not start the conversations with the union until after the DCTA board has determined, or at least giving clear direction on service delivery.
So help me understand the timelines then. So when does the CBA have to be in place? When is it have to be in place? The new one. When does the current one expire?
The current one expires March 31st, 2021. However, It is extremely common to go past that date as long as you are in an active negotiation process.
So we've consulted our attorneys. We've had, I know the NTMC's been having some conversation, the officers with the labor attorney. It's with the pandemic, especially, there's a lot of transit authorities that have gone beyond the typical or expected date. So long as we're in, I say we, the NTMC would be in active negotiations. There's, I think, opportunities to, I think it's going to be very important, in my opinion, this is the most strategic priority that we have, is understanding what our service strategy is going to be. And it just doesn't seem reasonable that there would be a finalized CBA before we understood that. So
right.
I think
I understand that. Okay,
yeah.
Good. So then what I'm seeing here is that what the plan is by January, I mean, we've got a meeting in January, a regular board meeting, but if we need to, we can do a special call at the beginning of January if we get the proposals, because time is critical. Time is very critical here. And so just very briefly, or I might just make a statement and we can, maybe Joe can give us something offline, because I know that the NTMC, quote unquote, directly negotiates with the CBA. But the NTMC has to have what the requirements are and the needs are of DCTA in order to do that. So no, we're not at the table. We're not negotiating with them, but we are communicating to NTMC. NTMC doesn't really have anything to negotiate with except what we give them. Is that my understanding of this?
Correct. So the typical approach is that you would have one DCTA member who can represent DCTA's budget as part of like what I would consider like the war room. So it would be a group of minds mostly made up of NTMC management. But it's typically the actual labor attorney who does any of the engagement with the ATU's attorney to actually conduct the negotiation.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, and I understand that. It just technically it's representative of how we got this whole thing structured to begin with. NTMC, but but in the end, DCTA has got to be able to negotiate what they need. And so, okay. All right. I appreciate that. That helps me understand this, and we understand this is a moving document, but it gives us a really good indication of what the expectations are and what we need to do in order to really maximize our efficiency in moving forward in this process. All right, I want to open it up to some of the other board members. Questions on this portion of the presentation. I think I heard that Raymond has another part of this presentation. Board members, just chime on in as you feel led.
Has this swim lane document been shared with NTMC?
No, this has not yet.
Okay.
This is the DCTA board is the first to see this document.
Gotcha. So Mayor Ukert and I have been exchanging lots and lots of conversation about these timelines, and we're both trying to figure out how to make things work and where does he want his direction. And so I think this would be very important because he's feeling backed into a corner on the CBA contract that since he doesn't know what the direction is, and of course we don't know what the direction is. So anything you guys can do to move that forward with the team over there, that would be outstanding.
Sure, absolutely. We will definitely share this with the NTMC board. I think too, seeing those specially called joint board meetings will be very helpful, as well as providing monthly updates on these items to both boards. I will let you know that we did have the labor attorney for NTMC scheduled to provide a CBA negotiation update to the NTMC board at yesterday's meeting. Chair Ukert requested that it be moved to the December board meeting. So that is still standing. And that's what you see in the first blue block at the bottom left of this document.
Yeah, and I think, and I really want to, I think part of the creation of this was an outgrowth of hearing some of those comments in the NTMC board meeting, and knowing that, we really need to, there's a lot of things that were sort of floating around. We're trying to just now anchor them down. And so anything that y'all can do with the NTMC board to get this out to them, I mean, if they want to have a special call meeting to go over it, that's fine, but at least present it to the membership. And if, the chair needs to have a discussion, or the vice chair, it's not a violation of a quorum. I think it'd just be really good to help them also understand sort of what the thoughts are on this before December 9th. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. We can send that out to them either today or tomorrow so that they have this document. And they did also request an update on several of these items for their December board meeting, which we've already placed on the agenda. But we can certainly ask Chair Ukert if he has interest in having an earlier meeting in order to specifically go over this.
Okay, great. All right.
Well, and I'd like to personally thank the board chair for asking for us to put something like this together. I think it helps everybody, including staff, get aligned. There's more clarity. I don't really, I don't know that any of us have had clarity because we have so many moving parts, but I feel like this is starting to gel as far as the processes are concerned and how the timelines line up. So this was, I think, a very helpful document. So thank you for that. And then
Raymond, one real quick question on
Yes.
the NTMC negotiations. You've got them beginning really next month or in January. So they have things to talk about outside of what they're going to be waiting on us for, as far as service standards, route changes, things such as that, or
So perhaps I should clarify. So part of that negotiation process is internal. So what you see in the December-January timeframe is
internal.
Really NTMC staff internal.
Okay.
And we can make an update to that document to say that that's internal.
No, it says it there. Yeah, I just didn't see it. It says it. It says finalized internal. Yeah.
Yeah. So NTMC, what the labor attorney would just start to reach out to the ATU's attorney to say, as an FYI, the CBA expires on March 31st. Does the ATU have a position? And so it's that normal kind of conversation. The actual sit-down conversation would not happen until much later.
Okay. All right. Okay. Any other questions from the board on this slide? Okay. Raymond, I believe you have some additional presentation.
So yes, thank you. That is a draft. Again, as was mentioned before, if there's additional conversation, we can certainly have that. I also wanted to offer a similar swim lane on what could be possible on the interlocal agreement that we just approved around shared services and the discussion around a shared facility. Again, this is just it's a draft. It's a concept of how we might step through some of the conversation. I definitely want to make sure that we're keeping the board apprised of the discussion with DART. So if we need special meetings, there's a lot of details that have to be filled in between each one of these panels. But that gives you at least a general idea of what we might be looking at with DART with regard to joint operations. And I didn't want to go into a lot of detail on that. It's for conversation purposes.
No, yeah, I appreciate this. And I think this is, as we get further down the road on this, and is this going to be part of the placeholder in board meetings moving forward? I know that with the last slide, there was going to be a placeholder that if there's updates, is this going to be the same?
Yes, thank you. I actually want to put an active update on the board meetings moving forward with regard to the conversations with DART.
Okay.
So we will have an agenda item, post-agenda item to discuss it.
And if I could, once you've completed this part of the presentation, I want to just circle back around and sort of go over a little bit of the conversation you and I had yesterday, if that's okay. Yeah.
Yes, it's complete. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, if we could maybe pull the slide down so I can see who I'm talking to. It's getting a little lonely over here. It's getting a little lonely. My dog can only, sometimes I thought being at home's fine, but boy, there's a lot of distractions at home. And I really appreciated Raymond putting this together, because as I talked with Chris, in our individual interviews with board members, my big, not push, desire is when do we get enough data that we can then provide that data to the MOS providers, whether it's VIA and what was the other name? I keep forgetting them. What's it?
Spare Lab.
Yeah, it's a combination between Spare and Lyft.
Okay. And of course, we've got we've got all kinds of different things about that. Do we use one? Is there a seamless fare platform? But those can. I at least wanted to get them the data so that they could begin to craft their proposal. And what I realized after, at least for me, after the last board special board meeting where we went over the transformation initiative and Accenture's sort of draft report, is we really almost have that. We've got what their recommendations were for maybe on-demand routes. We've got what their recommendations were for this benchmark of 10 boardings per hour, which I'll admit I question that. I don't know much about transportation. That doesn't seem like it's that many people, but the experts can tell us, can fill that in. So my desire is, and it might have been a little too aggressive, was, can we have a proposal? Can we have the data to the MOS providers, to those contractors, and get some type of proposal by the December board meeting? I think that's going to be a little bit pushing it, but I think we could. Go ahead, Nicole.
So currently in that colorful slide that we had up, in that orange bracket, we show that at the December board, in the green row, we show that at the December board meeting is when the final transformation initiative report with all of that data will be approved by the board. And so directly following that meeting, we would send that information to both Spare Lyft as well as VIA. And then at the January, February joint meeting that we have is where those proposals would be shared.
Okay. And I would say, and I'll say this, and I'll just repeat it back when we do future board meetings. I think we need to do that probably the beginning of January if the proposal's ready by then. Okay. Because we're really running a tight time frame when you start talking about the CBA negotiations. If we get that out in January, February, we've just really created a real crunch time. And depending on what the recommendations are, there could be some potential substantial changes that might need to be required. to that agreement. Don't know if there will be, but we certainly want to have enough time in order to process that. So those are sort of my thoughts of where I would like to see this go, and I appreciate the board's patience in letting me sort of lay that out, and would invite any comments or questions or other additional observations that would be helpful.
I would like to point out, and I appreciate that 2 of the 4 swim lanes are actually reinforcing regionalism with our partners in the area. So that's exciting to see, and that we're continuing to build those connections with those agencies. So kudos to the team for moving past our history on that and moving forward into a conversation that I think will drive some pretty significant results. I'm especially interested in seeing that silver line conversation as it continues to turn into something. So thank you guys for that.
Thank you, TJ. Any other comments?
Yes, Mayor Paul Christina here.
Yes, Paul.
I want to echo TJ's comments. This regionalism concept that's emerging is very important for us and the North Texas region as a whole. So kudos to the team for getting that codified and documented, and look forward to seeing how that can shape up.
Fantastic. Thank you. Great input.
And so, Mayor, I will add a note onto that where the presentation of the Moss vendor proposals are. I'm going to add a note that we need to host that as early as possible. And then I'll update this document and have Brandy send it out either this afternoon or tomorrow, so that you have an updated version.
Yeah, because I know with working with Trinity Metro, is it? Depending on how we do that or how DART discussions go, there's a lot of things that could look different, and I think we've got a lot of good things moving forward. So, okay, great. Any other comments or questions on this? Yes, go ahead, Raymond.
I appreciate the feedback from the board. Staff has been working really hard with building the relationships. I think they're better than they've ever been before. And yesterday was another reflection of that. I'm equally as excited about the opportunities. In my opinion, what we're doing with the transformation initiative, these 3 with a 3A or B, however you want to call it, in my opinion, these 3 initiatives, working with DART, working with Trinity Metro on this regional concept, but the highest priority is our mobility plan for our communities that we serve. Those 3 are, in my opinion, the most important initiatives to focus our board and staff's attention on in the next few quarters, because I think it informs much of what Accenture has highlighted. And this can be, as you mentioned, Mayor, we have an opportunity to completely change the way DCTA and the region operate. And it's exciting to me. And I think these 3 priorities are the ones that, if staff were to really focus attention, it's getting these done first. And because I think a lot of the things that are in that transformation initiative get informed by those decisions that we make. So thank you.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Any other comments, questions on this agenda item? Wonderful. All right. We'll move on then to agenda item number 2, which is discuss actions relating to the 87th Texas legislative session, beginning on your packet, on page 71.
All right, thank you very much. We do have Rick Dennis on the meeting today, and I'm going to turn it over to him. I've asked him to provide a brief update on activities that are relating to the 87th legislative session, and also include a little bit of information regarding the pre-filing, which did begin on Monday. And then, as this is our first active legislative session with Hillco, I've asked them to walk through some of the processes that they see kind of occurring during the legislative session, how they would leverage the board approved legislative agenda, as well as in working with staff. And that's from a bill related activity perspective, as well as the non-bill related activities. And then the third thing I've asked Rick to do is to help facilitate some discussion around the information, the draft policy information that we received from board member Gilmore, who I know that Brandy has forwarded that out. And we've also put it on a slide for the purposes of discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Rick to provide all of that update.
Thanks so much, Christina. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Well, first off, I appreciate the time, Chairman Watt and other members of the board. It's always a pleasure to get to visit with you guys and just further this dialogue. We certainly are starting to see some significant legislative action start to happen in Austin. We did have an election earlier this month in November, and it was really a very interesting outcome, despite the probably hundreds of millions of dollars spent by both parties to try to wrestle away seats that had been held by the opposing party. Everything in Texas pretty much stayed the same. We elected 83 Republicans to the state house, just like we had 83 Republicans prior, and 67 Democrats, just like we had 67 Democrats prior. In getting there, one Republican seat in Houston did flip to Democrat, but another seat in Houston that was Democrat flipped to Republican. So that's kind of how we got back to 83-67. Everyone in the DCTA delegation was reelected. One or two by close margins, but generally speaking, everyone had very strong support at the ballot box, particularly that of Representative Lynn Stuckey. He won his reelection by more than 10 points in a district that he would even tell you leading up to, he felt like was going to be a tight race. So big congratulations goes out to him. The House does have to elect a new speaker because former Speaker Dennis Bonnen has decided to leave the legislature. So he's in the process of wrapping up his service. And though it's unofficial at the moment, the House has settled on Representative Dade Phelan. He is a 4-term Republican from the East Texas area. He is the current chair of the House State Affairs Committee, which handles a very broad array of issues and makes it one of the more powerful positions in the state house. So he will be elevated to speaker. He held a press conference probably within 48 hours of the election results being finalized, and announced that he had secured the necessary amount of pledges or support from his colleagues to be the speaker. His number that are supporting him now has grown to basically it's a near unanimous decision by the 150 members in the state house. And so really just formality purposes only, he will be officially elected on the first day of the legislative session. This past Monday, the bill filing period did begin to open up, and we saw record-breaking activity on day one of the pre-filing period. And what the pre-filing period is, it's the period of time between the election and when the legislative session actually convenes that members and senators who were elected to serve can go ahead and start filing their bills. That does not necessarily mean that these bills have a higher priority as far as the entire legislative body is concerned, but it certainly signals what is a high priority to the individual members and senators who file these bills early. On day one, both House and Senate combined, we saw almost 550 measures get filed between the two chambers. My understanding is that is a record-breaking day one performance. On day two, it slowed down a little bit, which was to be expected, and only probably about 175 to 200 between the two chambers were filed. But
you have a question?
No, well, I've got, yeah, if on some of this, which is just sort of an overview of the of just what's happening, if we could maybe just get that in a memo out to the board, because I really want to move into discussion specifically about our legislative priorities, and then about the policy that was submitted by Board Member Gilmore about sort of communication policy. So yeah, these kind of sort of facts and things, if we could just get that in a memo form, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely.
You bet.
Okay, so would you like then to discuss next the legislative agenda or the proposed memo that would outline how we would be handling communications throughout the legislative session?
let's go ahead and go with the communications memo, just because I think the other one we've had some work on the legislative priorities, and but so let's do that so we can, because I think that's sort of new business.
Absolutely. I had an opportunity to review this memo with Lindsay Baker earlier in this week, and I think it is an excellent starting point that is very, very close to a final product. There's one thing, particularly in the legislative drafting process, that I want to make sure the board is aware as we consider what this proposal and what this policy will permanently be. And that is the strong preference by the members of the House and the members of the Senate that when they are carrying legislation, that they be a little bit more in the driver's seat for the drafting of those bills than what seems to be proposed in item number A as I have read it. And typically speaking, members of the House and the Senate, they like to take the conceptual ideas from stakeholders and turn those conceptual ideas over to what is called the Legislative Council. And think of the Legislative Council, if you will, as basically the law firm that serves the members of the House and the Senate. They're the ones who research statute and then ultimately decide what specific bill language needs to be put into place in order to make the amendments to state law and achieve the overall goal that said lawmaker and the people that they're working with seek to achieve. It's a very strong preference by those who serve that Ledge Council really be in the driver's seat in drafting that bill language. Pretty much all bills that pass through both bodies and to the governor's desk come in what we call legislative council form. So I wanted to kind of educate you guys to that, share with you my perspective, having been, on the staff side of things for 6 legislative sessions, as well as, 5 years now on the advocacy side. Historically, the efficient process that works is, you obtain all that stakeholder input from other entities and persons that could have a potential say or stake in the legislation you're proposing, kind of workshop all that together, get the idea to Ledge Council. They give you some draft language back. I want to emphasize that phrase, draft language back. That is a private document between Ledge Council and the author's office, and that draft is then shared amongst stakeholders. And it might be worked on a little bit more so that we go back and get a second draft, or it might be good to go in that form and ready to file. So then it's just up to the member to go ahead and get it formally filed. But in either circumstance, I just want to really emphasize the importance and the expertise of Ledge Council in doing a lot of the bill drafting and the bill writing, because they truly are the experts on the topic. And in a specific situation like what we're dealing with right now, where we're seeking to pass legislation that would give the DCTA P3 authority, it's really not like a math equation. In a math equation, of course, there is only one correct answer on the other side of the equal sign. This is a little bit different in that there's about 4 or 5 different ways that state law could be amended to gain that goal and get DCTA P3 authority. And those different ways are spread across different sections of statute that are in some cases even in different chapters of code. And in circumstances like that, lawmakers really like to trust the expert opinion of Ledge Council in determining exactly what does the language look like to achieve the goal.
So Rick, if I could, I mean, and I see what you're saying about, and I want to have Board Member Gilmore have a chance to weigh in, but I hear what you're saying, but I don't know if I take this. It seems like what I'm hearing you say is you read it as we have somebody draft the absolute specific language that we want, submit it to our state delegation, and then there's no question that the Legislative Council are the ones that draft any bill in its final form. I mean, it doesn't matter. You could present something that you guys have worked on for a year, and they're going to look at it and they're going to change it probably in a lot of different ways. So help me understand, I mean, because I certainly, as a board member, want to see at least something that's representative of, and I don't think the language that I'm anticipating looking at as a board member is language that I'm thinking and expect that would go down and become final law. But it certainly would have the right content and the right
be in the right zip code.
Well, and just it would have the language that really does communicate what our goals and our interests are. So I think the process of crafting that also helps the board further define and refine those particular goals. So yeah, I'm not sure. I hear what you're saying, but I don't know if I've really read that with the intent that we're going to submit a bill that looks like in font, in structure, and paragraph form. It's more the language that we believe we're the most comfortable with, and then it gets changed, and we got to look at the change. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Well, yes, and I think we're starting to better understand each other correctly, Mayor Watt, because having that flexibility of understanding that, draft language that you submit to Ledge Council, which Ledge Council does appreciate receiving sample language. As you alluded to, sir, that does not necessarily mean that what you get back is going to be exactly what you had submitted as sample language, but it does help Ledge Council better do their job. And that is certainly a very common part of the drafting process, the submitting of draft language. And kind of further understanding from you, sir, that the board understands the need for flexibility to know that what we give them could be very slightly different than what we get back, and that not being a hard stop moment that, well, wait, we cannot go any further because, they changed this word right here and that word right there.
Yeah.
I think we are now better understanding.
No, yeah, I mean, look, this is a process, and I trust the process, and we've been doing this a long time, and things very rarely come back without changes. And if there's substantive changes that really create issues, we've dealt with that before too. So I'm not really that concerned that that this board is saying that, or is expectation. In fact, I just want to invite TJ in. TJ, this is sort of some language that you presented. So if you have some input and comments on at least this particular one, this is the only one we're talking about, then certainly want to invite you to share.
Mayor Watts, I'll hopefully brief on this. It's a continuum, right? So the board comes up with an idea, or staff comes up with an idea that we want to support at the legislature. So for example, rewriting the DCTA bylaws that we did back in the last session. So the board came up with that conversation. We actually had our attorneys draft that information and send it to the state, where it was presented by our representatives. Then the state came back and they tweaked some of that language. There's some shalls and whatnot that got changed. I can tell you now that process, if I just went to my legislator and said, hey, we want to rework this entity, and I didn't present them any language, the state would have laughed at me because they wouldn't have known what to write. And so I get that there's a push-pull in this process. For my point, I think point A here is that the board needs to understand the what we want to be done, and we need to be able to have that, to Joe or whoever our attorney is, so that they can go ahead and develop language that makes the most sense to give a jumping off point for the state, because the state's not going to come back. They're not going to draft it for us, right? They don't have time. They're going to tweak the draft that we send them.
Well, Councilman, to answer your question, 15 years of doing this, I've done it both ways. I've submitted drafting requests with sample language. I have submitted drafting requests without sample language. I always get a draft bill back from the Legislative Council. So one of the two certainly helps them do their job a little bit more efficiently and a little bit more effectively. But those guys over there are very good and professionals, and they'll always get a work product back to you regardless of how vague the information and the overall package of the drafting request was when it was presented to them.
And to kind of give another bit of this is, I'm okay with the process, but for example, we had the language that came to us here on the public-private partnerships, and there was some language or some requirements in there that were presented that just they created some confusion. My understanding it was, and again, it's probably me because there's a lot coming at us. Some of the things that were presented to us as things that DCTA needed was because DART had them, and then on further review, DART doesn't even have those provisions available. So that's what I worry about in this kind of a process.
Okay, so if I could, because we're getting way bogged down on this, we're getting way into the weeds on this, because this is just a policy.
Yep.
And so, and that's not a criticism on anybody. I want us to move the discussion along, because I don't think that the way this is written, I think, Rick, what I'm hearing you say is that you just wanted to get an understanding that the position of the board, or that the idea of the board wasn't that there was this expectation that we're going to submit some language and by golly, it's not going to change one iota because that's what we're submitting. And that's not what this says. So I think unless somebody has some really strong objections to this, I think we understand sort of the spirit of this. And we could move on down through the document.
Absolutely. Moving on down through the document, in letter B, board workshops, I think that is a fantastic idea. It mirrors similar policies that Hilco has in place with other clients that has really helped to improve not just the communications, get your communications up to its highest level, but also to really get the work done. And when I read that, and I was visiting with Lindsay, what I would envision, obviously, of course, with the board's agreement is, January, February, and probably March, I would like to come up to the DCTA headquarters so that we can all sit in the same room, go over the bills that have been filed that I have tagged as having a potential, a keyword there, potential interest to the DCTA, so that we can kind of just real quickly go through them each one at a time and decide, is there an interest there or not? And if there is an interest, what does that look like? Is this something we want to publicly support? Is this something we want to publicly oppose? Is this something we want to be neutral on and just monitor it through the legislative process to make sure that, nothing would happen to it that would make us want to oppose it? And then probably starting, in March, we would transition those conversations a little bit to also include an update on past bills that we have gone through and looked at together. Here are the ones that were set for a hearing since the last time we had a chance to visit, based upon the board's feedback. When we did sit down and visit, here was the action that was taken as to whether or not we dropped a card in support, dropped a card in opposition to it, went to go visit with the author's office to see if there was some tweaks to the legislation that could be attained, and whatnot.
Okay. Yeah, because if we could, because I appreciate you sharing with us some of y'all's processes on how you're going to work with us during this legislative session, but if we could really also just move through this language to see if there's something in here that's really objectionable that we need to really discuss. And then I think as we move into the legislative session, we'll get briefings on, of course, you'll be coming up. I don't know who's going to be sitting in the room with you if we're still in this situation with.
Well, we could do it by Zoom, of course, as well. So.
Sure. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So there is nothing that I would say needs to be further flushed out.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. In fact, in C and D, the only thing that I feel like would need to be further flushed out would be my suggestion. Obviously, it's your decision, but my suggestion that you reverse the orders of C and D so that if a special circumstance came up, let's say a bill got amended in committee in a way where, okay, we need to huddle back up because now the intent of the legislation has significantly changed from what we had previously discussed. I personally would suggest we do a one-on-two really with the chair and the vice chair of the board before we move to a specially called board meeting, and really leave at the discretion of the chair and the vice chair if we need to advance to a specially called board meeting to further vet how this bill has been changed. Reason being, the reason I would suggest switching the order of those two is because a specially called board meeting obviously takes a lot more work. You have to post for it. It becomes a public hearing. And that's why I felt like, and I want your feedback on this, it would be most appropriate to advance to a two board officer vetting before we went there.
Okay. Open that up for discussion with the board.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
The phrase "if time allows," I think, gives the discretion there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because Rick, what I thought I heard you say was it's not so much switching an order; it's putting in another step that says we're going to, if something comes up that needs action, the chair and vice chair will sort of act as a clearinghouse and a decision-making point of whether it should go to the entire board or not, which is
absolutely
which is substantively very different than I think what is being suggested here. And that is the default is that if there's time, it goes to a special call board meeting for discussion. If there's not time, then this chair and vice chair kind of conference could take place, and at that moment, then there would be the decision on, well, it could. So is that, TJ, am I understanding, was that a summary of what I think this is trying to say?
I think that's an excellent summary of the two conversations going on here.
Okay. Anybody, go ahead, Rick, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and I think that TJ has answered my question well. As long as the board understands that we will have a couple of circumstances here and there when things really get moving, late April and May, where we're going to have to hone down on how bill language changed, and we're going to have to do it in a 24-hour period before that bill takes its next step. And in circumstances like that, it would be most effective in order to represent the interests of the DCTA that we go to a quick discussion with two board officers. And if it can't be resolved, what action, if any, should be taken at that point, then we go to a special called meeting.
Yeah. And I think that's what's being communicated there.
Okay, great.
In D. Yep. All right.
Great.
So if it's okay with you, Chair Watts, and the board, we will make that modification as we discussed, bring it back next month for final approval. And then for next steps go ahead, Rick.
And I was just going to say, and I may be misinterpreting this, but when you say in item D, if time does not allow, if time does not allow a special called board meeting, then the board officers. Is it my correct understanding that board officers would be chair, vice chair, and secretary?
Yeah, but then you've got a quorum.
Yeah, so I'm thinking maybe we need to tweak board officers.
If we could just put chair and vice chair.
Yeah, I think
that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, Rick?
No, none from me.
Well, Christina, you said before we went into that minor change that you'll make the changes and come back. What are the other changes besides the one we just talked about on the board officers? What other? That was it?
Modification, yes.
Okay, all right. Okay.
And then I was also going to state, as it relates to the bill that we're wanting to carry this session, we will start working on some language and plan on having a workshop with the board maybe in early January to kind of finish that information out.
Okay.
Does that work?
And if I may add one thing, Christina, to the legislation that we're working on for P3, of course, with the board's permission, I would also propose we have at least one, and it might require two workshop sessions with other stakeholders in this process. And those other stakeholders obviously would be the 3 member cities, possibly even Denton County, as well as anyone else, just to hear their thoughts and their ideas as to how the goal could be best achieved in a very tight and narrow way. Because like I said earlier, what Lindsay and I have come to understand after, pulling back multiple layers of the onion is there's actually about 3 or 4 different ways you could amend state law to get this done. And I think it would be very valuable in the process. And I know that Senator Nelson would probably appreciate as well, since we would envision her being our Senate author, that we have those stakeholder input sessions as well.
Okay, great. All right. And I think we had one other section of this presentation, which is just the legislative agenda in general.
Mm-hmm.
Chair,
Yes.
Diane has her hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's no other perfect solution. I still am a little bit uncomfortable with 2 board members. And I understand that we want to avoid a quorum, but I just want to go on record as saying I'm still uncomfortable with that. And then on the last paragraph where it says no action shall be taken, blah, 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 the board shall be briefed monthly on action taken on legislation. I would want to be briefed more than once a month. And it doesn't have to be like we're doing right now. It could be a memo or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense, Mayor?
Yes, it does. In fact, I appreciate you pointing something out, and that is there seems to be a conflict where it says no action shall be taken on a piece of legislation unless the board of directors has given direction. But in paragraph D, that sort of stands in contradiction to that, because the action, I guess if you're saying action is board approval, then I get that, but D is saying, so Diane, what would be your thoughts on what would be your, what would you need to get more comfortable with if there's something that happens that is really just on a time crunch? What would be something that you could offer? Yeah.
I was going to ask Rick, I mean, what do other entities do? I mean, is this typically what's done?
Yes, typically it is. I'll give an example. I do some work with the town of Prosper, and I brief their city council at a certain frequency, but whenever there is an action of immediate attention that comes up, I always work with the city manager, who then gives me direction on behalf of the city council as to, okay, the spill language has pivoted significantly from what we had previously discussed. So now let's go do X, Y, Z instead of A, B, and C.
And I completely understand that. And that's one of the problems in comparing our agency to a municipality, in that our agency is not representative of the city, a city. This is a board that's representative of actually 3 cities and a county. And so I think it's a little bit different. I certainly would not compare it to what happens in a municipality. So Highland Village is going to take care of Highland Village, Louisville is going to take care of Louisville, Denton. But in this board, with stakeholders that are different, that's what I'm having a little problem with. So Mayor, and thank you for your question. The truth is I have been going through my mind going, what would I feel comfortable with? And at this point, I don't know, honestly. I was hoping that there'd be something that would be more comparable to what we face as an agency. But I am open enough to say, you know what, if this is the way we want to go until there's an issue, then that's fine.
Okay, and I guess if I could get just some clarity on, because when I read the first line of the last paragraph, no action shall be taken on a piece of legislation unless the board of directors has given direction. What is that word action referring to?
Is that a question for me, sir?
Yeah. Well, I guess, or TJ, I mean, it says no action. Does that mean action by the board, or does that mean action by the Texas legislature? So
no,
go ahead.
To me, it was staff and or our representatives. So let's say a piece of legislation pops up that really hasn't been on our radar, and we haven't really as a board addressed it. I would hate for staff or our representatives to get out ahead of us on whether or not we wanted to respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, and that helps me. So just one question of clarification, because when I look at paragraph D,
yep.
So let's say your scenario occurred, something happened, and nobody knows, it's come out of left field. And so we don't have time for special call board meetings. So the board chair and vice chair, at least as it's proposed here, get together and they have to come up with, give our representatives some direction.
Yeah, fair.
Does
Fair.
that
I mean,
violate that first line of that paragraph?
right.
This is Joe. You'd have to just put except as provided above qualification in there. If you
Okay.
allow the chair or the vice chair to get to take action or tell them to take action if you can't call a meeting of the board of directors.
So let
Joe,
me-
you can take the rest of this meeting off. You've earned your pay.
I
Bye.
think here's the
Go ahead, Raymond.
thank you, Mayor. A scenario where I don't know that the language is necessarily specific enough, and maybe it is. So let me offer a comment here. So the concern for me and for staff through these processes is weighing in, dropping a card, doing any of those things where an item may not be or may actually be in conflict, depending on where a city, the specific city or the county might feel that their particular city sits on a particular item. So you could actually have items where you as a representative, as a board chair or a vice chair could feel like it's in the best interest, but it may not be in the best interest of one of the other member cities or the county that's on our board. So I would err on the side as the president and CEO to not want to render an opinion or drop a card or do any of those things, because I don't know that they would necessarily be required that we weigh in on subjects. So I think a less risky scenario that I think maybe board member Costa's talking about is where their city may not be, or your city may not be in agreement with another city. And I think that's the challenge that we have, because it's multiple cities and multiple disciplines, if you will, that are on our board. So I just offer that observation and how we address that in this language.
And from that perspective, typically what we have done is we've remained silent on anything where there's conflict. We do have ongoing conversations with member city government affairs staff on a very regular basis, especially during the legislative session. So we're typically in lockstep with what our member cities are doing. And if we hear of something, we call up and we ask. So that hasn't really been an issue in the past.
So Raymond, so was your concern with the language similar to Chairmember Costas as far as direction being given by a chair and a vice chair? Was that the thrust of?
I think I just wanted to offer that up as an observation that it could be a concern, and as long as the board is comfortable with allowing the chair and vice chair to take action on behalf of the board, then that clears it up for me.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Connie, go ahead.
One of the things that we used to do in this kind of a situation, in this case with the city, but is that Hilco could come to our staff, whoever, whether it's the CEO or Lindsay or Christina, come to staff if there's not the time, and the staff then reaches out to the entire board one-on-one. Because as long as it's between the board member and the staff, you're not violating any, quorum or open meetings, because it can be one-on-one. And if that is something that would help, because they would have then gotten the input from the entire board. It's just the board can't discuss it with each other. You see what I'm saying?
Yes. Okay. So it sounds like we've got basically two areas of concern, or primarily one, and that is how do we deal with the process of if there's not time, and I don't really think that that's referring to the chair and vice chair is going to give direction to approve, and therefore it gets voted on. I would not be in favor of that. I mean, whatever action is taken should not be the final action. So if we could maybe pull the screen down, the presentation down. So we can spend some time wordsmithing it, or we've got at least some input. Now, I will say on that last line where it talks about no action shall be taken unless the board of directors, I think we probably could expand that to also say no actions taken by either staff or our representatives in Austin without somebody knowing. I mean, we just don't, so we might can flush that out a little bit, because I know that, and I don't think anybody would. Okay, I don't think anybody would. So we've got those, really one outstanding issue, and that is how do we handle, issues that arise where there's not enough time for a special board meeting. That seems to be really the crux of the matter. So we can continue to work on this and maybe let Joe sort of take a couple of cracks at it to see if there's some language that he could add that could help clean some of that up. Now, the issue we have is not necessarily a language issue. It's a process and a sort of a concept issue. Is there any more input from the other board members on sort of what we're discussing now to help us sort of get some additional feedback on that? I mean, what we could do, well, and also, and this I think would go without saying, that if paragraph D was activated, then I think that immediately there goes out to the rest of the board what that direction or action was, because you can't. I mean, you got to notify people. So I think it's, we could leave it in, we could take it out, we could. I mean, we could say no, we're not gonna have that flexibility or that kind of maneuverability, if we would say, if something comes up that quickly. But if something comes up, somebody's got to give direction. Yes, Diane.
So Mayor, I mean, I would be okay with what Connie suggested. What are your thoughts?
About staff?
Well, about staff contacting the board members individually so that there is no quorum discussion.
Right. Yeah. As long as, I mean, Joe, I mean, would that meet muster? Would that meet, because if staff contacted, let's say something came up real quickly. Staff sends out a blast email to the board. Hey, this is what's happening. Unless we hear from you, this is what we're going to do. All right. Or let us know what you want to do. And it all comes back to one central place, gets compiled, and that direction goes out.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, as long as we got communication going back to one central place and we're not cross-communicating with each other, violating meetings, then we're fine.
Okay.
I'd like to ask for some clarification here too. We did have the board approve our legislative agenda, which to me provides staff and Hillco some pretty good direction as to what the board wants the agency to support and to oppose. So I'm assuming in these situations where you're talking about needing to call everybody or get consensus among the board members would either be the bill that was filed maybe had some major modifications and it's kind of going through the process and need to get consensus on how to modify those changes, or B, that it's something that's not currently on our legislative agenda that the board has approved and staff and Hillco believe that it's something that we either should support or oppose. Right? Because everything else has been pretty well slated in our legislative agenda. And Rick, I don't know if you want to provide any more.
Yeah, and Christina, where I believe you're going with that, with your statement is that this is really going to be a tool for the 10%, because 90% of the decisions that we will ultimately make, we will be making using item number B. And it's only for those rare moments where something maybe extreme happens at the end of the legislative session that we'll have to look for direction on a decision outside of item number B. And I think that is correct. I do not envision that we would have to use this tool often, but I do also think it's good to have it in the toolbox in the event that something does happen late in session. Or another example would be if a bill gets filed after we've had our most recent workshop, but then also gets quickly posted for a hearing before we've had a chance to have our next workshop. That might be another situation where we would want to, you know, in a rare circumstance, invoke this tool.
Okay, so we got to move on from this. So I think, go ahead.
And if I may as well, Mayor Costa had one more suggestion that we have not drilled down on, and that was that the board be notified of all actions at a frequency greater than monthly. And just my 5 cents, I think she has a very valid point, and I am more than happy to provide weekly memos to be disseminated to the board that outline actions taken on behalf of DCTA that of course were prior approved, but that they did actually occur within the last 7 days. If we just need to make a small tweak to address that issue she brought up.
Sure. No, I think I would, and if we didn't have this language, I would anticipate we would get it on a more frequent basis than monthly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think it's just, so I think what we could do is on that agenda item C, because, you know, obviously any action on a bill, it's got to come before, I mean, the board, the DCTA board has to approve that if we've got a bill going to the legislature, we've got to give that green light eventually to say, okay, we want it to move forward. So maybe on C, what we can do is have a hybrid. And Joe, you can tell me if this will work. Because what I heard you say is you can sit out an email to the individual board members as long as those responses are coming back to a central place. It's not a breach of the quorum requirement. So what if you had the chair and the vice chair who had to be consulted because of a lack of time, a decision was made, and that decision gets disseminated out to the board. And then they can come back with either, hey, that's fine, or no, I'm not okay with that. I mean, so really it's, at least you have a starting point. But if not, we can just say, okay, they all go out to the board, but then you've got to determine what process. In other words, if you don't reply, you've got to have a standard that says, if silence is either approval or denial of what you're being sent. I mean, because sometimes people, you know, might not have time to respond or they don't respond. So let's do this. We got a little bit of time on this. So we've got another board meeting December 10th, I believe. If TJ, if you could maybe work with Joe or whoever and the rest of the board members, send in, if you have any additional comments other than what have been made here, send in to staff so that Joe can maybe begin to craft something that might work that incorporates all these different interests and stakeholder comments that we've had. And then we can bring that back in December because the legislature is still not in session, so we've got some time to solidify this. All right, okay. And so I think the other thing we have is the legislative agenda, or we've already finished that, right?
Right, that was
I just have one more point to bring up,
Yes.
Mayor Watts. And that is, even though this policy is not yet formally adopted, would it be acceptable to the board if I worked with staff, Christina and Raymond, to go ahead and start outside stakeholder process in drafting sample language to achieve the P3 goal?
Oh, well, I mean, I think I think when we approved the legislative agenda, I mean, yeah, something's got to be coming to us and we have time. So C is not going to be activated. So, I mean, yes, whatever needs to be drafted to get to the board for discussion and approval, absolutely. Sooner than later, probably. Yep.
Then I will work with Christina and Raymond to get that process moving in a robust manner with the goal to have draft sample bill language to show at the next board meeting.
Okay. Any more discussion on agenda item 2? All right. Yeah. So go ahead, TJ.
Mayor Watts, sorry about that. Joe, do we even need to pursue the P3 language, or do we already have those tools available to us?
So we had, and again, not to go down or get in the weeds in here, we did have, I had a discussion with staff last week, I guess it was last week, and I think that we need to have a further discussion with the board because and further looking at the P3, the ability to do the P3 legislation would give us a few extra tools that we would have that we don't currently have, or at least clarify what we're able to do. And it really relates back to what we can and can't do now under the competitive bidding statute. So I think we need to have a further discussion on that.
Okay.
At a later date.
All right. So you're saying what Rick had mentioned as far as looking at drafting language, you're saying toll that until we can have a discussion maybe in December about the specific language.
But I think we could also go ahead and start getting some language drafted, just so you guys have something to digest and look at, as opposed to just talking about it in the grand scheme.
Okay. All right. So we're back on to where we were before. Yeah. We're going to start drafting some language, and then we're going to have a discussion, more in-depth discussion about this in December. Okay. All right. Fantastic. All right. Anything else on agenda item number 2? It is 12:05. Let's take a break. Let's come back about 12:20. We'll sort of go through our working lunch. Thank you all. Yeah, I think I said come back at 12:20. Let's go ahead and get started.
I'm ready. We're recording.
All right. Welcome back to this meeting of the Denton County Transportation Authority. It is November 12th, 2020, and the time is 12:23. We're moving through our agenda items. For our regular agenda, we are on agenda item number 3, which is consider approval of a resolution R20-22 approving the Denton County Transportation Reinvestment Program policy, and that's located in your packet at 72 through 95.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. On this slide, it shows all the things that we discussed the last board meeting, which were incorporated into the draft, which was included in the packet. I will say that Chair Watts did bring to our attention that we inadvertently did omit a statement, next slide, regarding enabling the member cities to use allocated funds for current projects. So, and that was that pre-award authority. So we added in this language, and I think this should take care of the issue. And I apologize, I'm not sure how we deleted that, but so that is back in there. So that should cover everything that was discussed in all of the previous meetings relating to this item. Are there any other questions or concerns about the draft other than this section 5 wording?
Any questions? So my understanding is the draft that we have presented in our backup together with this addition is what staff is recommending to be approved at this time.
Exactly.
Okay.
Diane has her hand raised.
Yes, Diane.
I just have a question because I've slept since then. So I remember there was a part in there that suggested that any new cities coming in would have to wait 10 years before applying for the TRIP. Christina?
Yes. Sorry, you cut out for the last part.
I'm so sorry.
I don't recall where we landed on that. Let me look it up. I've got it all in front of me.
It would have been at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. I think we took that part out or modified it, but I cannot recall exactly. A municipality which becomes a participating member of DCTA under the provisions of the Texas Transportation Code will become an eligible recipient of DCTA TRIP funding in the next fiscal year following collection of transit sales and use tax. So the 10 years was removed and they would be eligible the next following year.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Christina, one thing, because I was looking at the blue down here on the addition.
Yes.
What does the red represent here in subsequent years? Because I don't know why, I don't know if that needs to be there. It
that
just says,
was
go ahead.
Based on discussion from the last board meeting. That was not a new change. That was included in the board packet.
Okay. So should a member city have project in subsequent years of what? I mean, where is this going? I need to see where this is. I'm taking this out of context somewhere, I believe. So let's see.
This is Andrew.
Yes, Andrew.
Okay, Andrew, thank you.
This is just saying after the first year. So saying the first year, you're just going through the policy and everything is sort of set for the first year. Then subsequent years after the first year, meaning everything after that first year, it's open to this treatment here.
Oh, you're saying in subsequent years after the initial year of the trip policy.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. Let me see. Let me find where that's going to. Where would that be inserted? Where is that? Page 77.
Page 77, section 5, project selection, and it's the third paragraph. And actually looking at the information prior to that, it's not solely discussing the first year, so we probably could remove that.
Yeah, yeah. Take out that in subsequent years, and because I think that, yeah. Okay. All right, so then, go ahead, Connie.
Staff would recommend approval based on the modifications discussed today of this policy.
All right, questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
In the sentence that we were just talking about, where we say they may be reimbursed in subsequent years, we're not committing. I just want to verify we're not committing to, because if the funds aren't available, we can't be, providing the future years. You know what I'm saying? We're not committing to future years, right?
Well, we are committing to it, but in the event that the funding doesn't end up being available or the amount is less than what it was anticipated, then that's why it states that it would be borne by the member city.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Chair would entertain action on this item.
Move to approve with the discussed changes.
All right. I'm not even sure who's on. Let me try to pull. Could we pull the slide down, please? All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I think I heard you. There you go. All right. Motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to agenda item number 4. Consider approval of spring 2021 University of North Texas service changes, packet 96 through 155.
Thank you, Chair. So there is a memo on page 96 of your packet, but there are actually 2 items I'd like to cover in this agenda item. And so the first is going to be just a general overview of the DCTA service change process. And then the second will actually be the UNT items. So on page 97 of your packet, if I could review that first, and hopefully, TJ, this will answer some of your questions as well. This is the general DCTA service change process that we use internally. Now, this cycle does not include the budget cycle. So the budget cycle goes in conjunction with this, but obviously any changes would be based on available funding. But we did just want to kind of call out, DCTA conducts 3 service changes a year. We typically coordinate those with the start of each semester. So that would be the summer, the spring, and the fall. The CBA currently requires that we conduct a minimum of 3 bids, and there are a lot of benefits to having those 3 bids. So it allows the operators to adjust their schedules as needed throughout the year during those 3 time periods. It allows NTMC or the contractor who's providing the operators to be able to scale operator numbers up and down as needed, which helps us manage our cost. And then it also allows us kind of 3 opportunities throughout the year to launch innovative service. Now, we have launched service before that has been out of this cycle, but I will say it is a complicated process, and if we can include any type of service modifications within this existing process, it just goes a lot smoother. the cycle is already existing. So we kind of start with the annual UNT service agreement. We start working with UNT probably like in June time framing to kind of talk about what their enrollment numbers look like for the next school year, and identify kind of ideally what their service might look like based on kind of campus decisions that they've made, enrollment and things of that nature. At that point in time, we then put together an annual proposal, knowing that we might have some tweaks for the spring semester and then the summer semester following that. So as we get that agreement into place, then we conduct a fall service bid, which typically happens in the August timeframe. And then the full service that fall service will launch typically in September. As soon as that fall service launches, we then start thinking as an agency, okay, are there any service modifications that we would like to make in the next round of service changes? So we start thinking about those changes, we discuss them with the board. Once we kind of have a firm nod of approval on those service changes, we then take it out for public involvement if that is required. Typically what requires that public involvement process is by modifying a fixed route by 25% or more. And if that's the case, then we have to take any of those changes out to the public for feedback, but then we also have to conduct a Title VI analysis. And so then we bring that report back. So we would bring to you the service change proposal, the public feedback, and the Title VI analysis. And then it's at that time that the DCTA board would approve the service. That then forces our hand into conducting a bid in order to make sure that we have the operator base for that service level. And then we begin the next round of service. And as soon as that rubber hits the road, we start thinking about the next round of service changes. So it's quite a cycle. Like I said, we typically do service changes in September, in January, and then in May. Typically, the September service changes are the most heavy, where we have the most modification. And that's typically because we are starting off the fall semester. So we have a new annual agreement with the University of North Texas. And obviously their desires scale up or down our fixed route service quite significantly. The January services are typically a little bit smaller. We consider those tweaks, at least historically, that's the way that they've been. And then the May service changes are fairly light. They're mostly the reduction of service because of UNT's summer semester. So like I said, we strive to include non-school related service changes like into this cycle. It makes just the process itself, just because it's cumbersome for each round of service changes. We really try not to have more than 3 service changes each year because I think that can get confusing for the customer. It's also, as you can see, it takes several months to get one set of service changes conducted. And so, we want to mitigate how many rounds of that are occurring within a fiscal year. But this kind of gives you an overarching just kind of idea. So where we are at currently would be kind of in this spring service bid, that blue circle down at the very bottom is where we're at. So we've worked with UNT to determine what they have desired for their spring 2021 service levels. It is not a change from the fall service level, which means we are not required to do any sort of public involvement. And so we were bringing the board that service proposal for approval today. Are there any questions on the general cycle?
I guess for the one I have is, so then if I'm out of posting, Joe, just let me know. It looks like any service changes that are made either to the UNT contract or based upon our discussions on the transformation initiative, if they were on demand or different routes, you're saying those would not be implemented until May at the
Correct.
earliest. Okay.
Correct. We anticipate that those changes are going to be substantial enough that they will pass the 25% threshold mark, therefore requiring the public involvement process. And that is really what is lengthy. So the agency's public involvement plan requires that our information is out a minimum of 21 days to provide an opportunity for the public to provide their feedback. And then we have to collect all of that information and kind of align it with when the board posting dates are. So we try to we try to plan our public meetings so that we can maximize that amount of time. But sometimes, you know, like this time around, we have a public meeting at the beginning of February, and we have planned the timeline so that we can bring all of that back to the board at the February board meeting.
Okay. All right.
So.
Okay.
And it gives time to.
Go ahead.
And it gives us time to communicate to the public the change.
Right.
So
Correct. That part is not included. And just as a reminder, anytime we do change service, we do conduct a bid with the union and for the bus operators. And that just the notification process, the bid process, and the training for the service launch is a minimum 45-day turn. So that kind of puts into perspective what's required on our end just from the bus operator perspective.
Okay. All right. Any more questions on this portion of this presentation?
Excellent. So at this point, as I said before, our service delivery with UNT is coordinated each year. Currently, we operate 11 fixed routes and 1 lift on demand zone. We operate our service Monday through Friday, and then we have select services that offer transportation service nights and weekends. And then we do a limited summer schedule, which is typically in that mid-May to late August timeframe. So we agree on kind of an annual service delivery. That is how we set the annual budget, which was included in the FY21 budget. And then we look at each semester individually to see if we need to tweak anything. So the board approved the fall 2020 service changes back in August, and we are now bringing the spring 2021 service levels. Conveniently, what the recommended spring 2021 service levels are identical to the fall 2020. So the total cost of service is fully covered by the approved FY21 budget. I did detail out exactly what each route looks like, pages 104 through 115 in your packet, and a breakdown of the annual budget can be found on page 102. But it is, like I said, an exact replica of the fall 2020 service. So at this point, DCTA staff is recommending approval of the spring 2021 UNT service levels as detailed in the packet.
All right. Any questions for staff or comments? And this is an action item, so chair would entertain action on this agenda item.
Motion to approve.
All right, we have a motion to approve. Board Member Costa.
Second.
We have a second by Board Member Gilmore. All in favor of agenda item 4, please signify by saying aye.
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 All right, the motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is consider authorizing the CEO to enter into a letter of intent with Trinity Metro for the purpose of exploring bus operations and maintenance operations. And this can be found on your packet at 116 through 120.
As you know, and as we discussed earlier, staff is preliminarily discussing bus operations and maintenance partnership opportunities with Trinity Metro. We have included a letter of intent in your packet, and that can be found on pages 118 through 120. The letter of intent would basically be to formalize the process of DCTA and Trinity Metro, exploring what those options might be. And so whether that is contracting with Trinity Metro and ILA between DCTA and Trinity Metro, or the potential of utilizing the North Texas Mobility Corporation jointly for the purpose of bus operations and maintenance. Trinity Metro is taking this exact same letter of intent to their board on the 16th of this month. So obviously nothing would be done as far as exploration until both boards have approved their respective CEOs to sign the letter of intent. There are 3 sections I'd like to call out on the letter of intent. If you look at page 118 in your packet, at the very bottom, there's a section called No Binding Agreement Without Board's Approval. And I want to call this out simply because this is basically saying that this is just an exploration and that no agreement would be made without taking it to both respective boards for approval. On page 119, there's a section at the top called Potential Intended Benefits. And those are the areas that we would be exploring jointly to see how that kind of partnership would work. That does not mean that this is everything that would be covered. We might, in our discussions, come up with another area that makes more sense to provide efficient and cost-effective service, or we might determine that one of those sections needs to be removed simply because it creates too much of an impact to the workflow. And then on the middle of page 119, the potential structure for achieving collaboration. This is where it's specifically called out that DCTA and Trinity Metro shall investigate the potential use of NTMC, the use of an interlocal agreement, or other structures that may be applicable to serve both parties. So at this time, staff is recommending that the DCTA board authorize the CEO to sign this letter of intent with Trinity Metro for the purpose of exploring bus operations and maintenance options. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Yes, council member, board member Gilmore.
People have called me much worse. Is the reason, as I'm reading this, Nicole, probably a better way to ask this. It looks to be that we're basically discussing up to and including full outsourcing. Is that just to give you guys the most room to have a conversation?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, any others? Chair would entertain action on this agenda item.
Motion to approve.
Got a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second for agenda item number 5. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. We've already done agenda item number 6. So we'll move to agenda item number 7, rail operations and maintenance contract transition update, packet page 145.
All right, thank you. And this is just going to be a brief update. Through the past several months, we've been informing you of the, for initially it was a potential transition of the rail operations and maintenance contract from First Transit to Rio Grande Pacific. Last month, you did approve the reassignment to Rio Grande Pacific. So between working with First Transit, Rio Grande Pacific, and the and their subcontractor Stadler, as well as the Federal Railroad Administration, I'm happy to announce that that transition did complete at the end of last month. It was a very speedy process, but we had a lot of great cooperation and partnership with everybody, just working towards getting that goal completed. So we did get the ball across the goal line, and now Rio Grande is our operator. And there have been some articles in the paper, and I've seen
Right.
Chair Watts quoted in there. So those were great quotes. So thank you for that. But again, from a passenger perspective, they shouldn't see any type of change. It was a very seamless transition.
Okay. Any comments or questions on that? All right, thank you. I appreciate
Raymond
that.
had a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead, Raymond.
Sorry, I had my
No,
real-
yeah, I can't see because when the president, yeah.
I just want to thank Christina and Ronnie on our staff and the FRA for doing an incredible job in a very short period of time. It really deserves to be mentioned. This is the second time that we've transitioned our service. And I think if you were to talk to anybody at the FRA or anyone that's tried to do this before, the speed at which we're able to do these things because of the team and the partnership that we have and the relationships with the FRA have just been amazing to watch. I've spoken to the majority of the folks on staff that were impacted by the transition. They're all very happy to be part of the Rio Grande Stadler team. So again, I just wanted to offer my thanks to staff for a job well done.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Christina, for that. All right, we'll move on then to agenda item number 8, which is to discuss local and regional transportation and legislative issues. I don't have any updates. Board Member Costa, do you have any updates?
We did have our DRMC meeting last week, and for my report, on behalf of DCTA, we just reported that we turned 18 years old, so we're adults.
Oh boy, yeah, man, oh man, that's bad news.
I did give an update on our COVID-19 and our transformation initiative. I spoke about our free ride promotions during the election, which DART did as well, and then our rail trail updates. And we did wish Gary with DART well as he retires, and just express that DCTA is looking forward to working with whoever comes to fill his shoes. And that's it, Mayor.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. I believe then we've got future agenda items and board member requests. I think one we talked about and we've sort of alluded to is the joint meeting with the NTMC and DCTA. And I think that's, we've got a couple of things to get done before we can actually solidify that, but it sounds like it's going to be sometime probably in January, early January or something like that, depending on information. All right. Any other board member agenda item requests or future agenda items?
I think we had coming to us at some point the administrative costs review for TRIP.
Okay.
Just what the assumptions were going to be, or on the ideas, and I know we got a lot going on, so I understand.
Okay. All right. Anything else on this agenda item?
We will be posting an agenda item to brief the board on the progress of the negotiations with DART moving forward.
Okay. Was that one that would be a regular placeholder? Okay.
Yes.
And I think if I remember correctly, that's the same with Trinity Metro and the discussions there too as well.
Yes.
And then
Okay.
we'll also have a regular reoccurring monthly legislative update, but we will leave as per your request, we'll leave some things for a memo, but then just update according to DCTA.
Okay. All right.
And Mayor, I have already added to the Outlook moving forward all the way through May an update on the priorities and the deadlines. And so we'll bring that document up with updates and be able to update the board on all those specific items.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And reports on items of community interest. Anybody have any announcements or staff have any? Okay. And I see we got 2 executive sessions. Was one of those a placeholder and the other one, I mean, are both of these ones we need to go through? I couldn't quite.
They're both placeholders.
Okay. So we don't really have anything to go into executive session about. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Well, if that's the case, Chair would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
I was going to say, nobody wants to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, I think I heard everybody. So yeah, I think it was unanimous. All right. Y'all take care.
Thank you, Mayor Watts.
You bet.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.